The blood on Grakka's hands had dried to a dark rust by the time she walked into Millfield carrying the Bandit King's severed head. But the villagers still screamed, as if she were death itself come to claim them. She had tracked Roderick the Red for 3 weeks through the wilderness, following the trail of burned farmsteads and murdered families that marked his passage like a grotesque map. The bounty posted in 5 townships had promised 200 gold crowns for his death or capture, enough to buy passage across the sea and start somewhere fresh, somewhere her green skin and tusks might draw less hatred. She had found him camped in the old quarry with what remained of his band, 7 hard men sharpening blades around a fire built from stolen furniture. The fight had been brutal and brief. Grakka fought with the efficiency her father had beaten into her during long training sessions in their mountain hold, before the human soldiers came and burned it all to ash. She killed the sentries first, silent as winter mist. Then she walked into their camp and challenged Roderick directly, giving him the warrior's death her honor demanded even though he deserved far worse. He had been fast with his twin daggers, but not fast enough. She broke his wrist with her bare hands, then drove her own blade through his throat. The other bandits scattered into the darkness rather than face her. She took only the head, wrapping it in burlap from their supply packs, and began the 2-day walk to Millfield, the closest settlement that had posted the bounty. Now she stood in the village square, exhausted and hungry, holding up her grisly proof of completion, and watched armed men pour from doorways and alleys. They formed a semicircle around her, pitchforks and hunting spears and old rusted swords raised toward her chest. No one stepped forward to verify the kill. No one offered water or thanks. They simply stared at her with wide, terrified eyes, as if she had not just ended the threat that had kept them barricaded in their homes for months. "Roderick the Red is dead," Grakka said, her voice carrying across the square. She spoke the human common tongue carefully, aware of how her tusks made certain sounds come out differently than they intended. "I have come for the bounty posted by your magistrate." An older man with a silver beard pushed his way to the front of the crowd, though he kept his distance. His fine wool coat marked him as someone of importance. "That is indeed Roderick," he said, peering at the head from several feet away. His face had gone pale. But the bounty was meant for human hunters, not for monsters who would replace one threat with another. The word monster hit Grakka like a physical blow, though she had heard it 1,000 times before. She had just killed a man who had raped and murdered his way across the countryside, who had burned children alive in their beds for sport, and they looked at her with more fear than they had ever shown him. Something hot and furious rose in her chest, but she forced it down. She needed that gold. She needed to leave these lands and find somewhere, anywhere, that might offer a different life. "I am no threat to you," she said evenly. "I killed your enemy. Pay me what was promised, and I will leave your village and never return." "We will pay you nothing," the magistrate said, finding courage in the armed men surrounding him. "Leave now, before we put you down like the beast you are." Grakka felt the weight of every weapon pointed at her, calculated the odds of fighting her way free. She could probably kill a dozen before they brought her down, but she was tired to her bones and had no wish to slaughter frightened farmers defending their homes. Even if those farmers were ungrateful cowards who could not see past her green skin. "I killed Roderick and his band," she said quietly, letting the fury seep into her words. "I tracked them for 3 weeks. I ended the terror that kept your children hiding in cellars and your women afraid to walk to the well. I did what none of you had the courage to do, and you call me monster." "Because that is what you are," a woman shouted from the safety of the crowd. "Orc filth. We know your kind. Murderers and savages, everyone." Grakka dropped the severed head in the dirt at her feet, It rolled slightly, coming to rest with Roderick's dead eyes staring up at the cloudy sky. "Then you can live with your monster," she said. "Keep your gold. I hope you choke on it." She turned and walked away, her back rigid with controlled rage, half expecting a spear between her shoulder blades. But the crowd parted before her, people scrambling to get out of her path as if she carried plague. She walked past the last houses, past the wooden palisade that surrounded the village and into the forest beyond. Only when the trees swallowed her did she allow herself to slump against an oak trunk, sliding down to sit in the dead leaves. She had been so careful. She had approached openly in daylight with proof of her deed. She had spoken respectfully and asked only for what was owed. And still, they had treated her like a rabid dog to be driven off with sticks and stones. Grakka pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting back the burning sensation that came before tears. She would not cry, not for them. Not for any humans who saw only green skin and tusks and made their judgments accordingly. She had 3 silver coins in her belt pouch, stolen from Roderick's camp. Barely enough for a week's food if she was careful. Her leather armor was torn in 2 places from the fight, and her water skin was nearly empty. She needed to find work, real work, somewhere that would look past what she was long enough to see what she could do. But every town was the same, every village. They saw an orc and reached for weapons. Never mind that she had never raised her hand against an innocent in her entire life. The sound of footsteps in the undergrowth made her surge to her feet, hand on her sword hilt. But it was not an angry mob come to finish what they started. Instead, a single man emerged from between the trees, walking with the careful deliberation of someone trying not to appear threatening. He was young, perhaps 20 summers, with brown hair that fell across his forehead and honest blue eyes that met hers without flinching away. He wore simple farmer's clothes, homespun and patched, and carried a canvas pack over one shoulder. "I am not here to fight," he said immediately, raising both hands to show they were empty. "I saw what happened in the square. It was wrong. Grakka did not release her sword. What do you want?" "To apologize, I suppose, and to offer what I can." He carefully lowered his pack and opened it, pulling out a wrapped bundle. "Food, bread and cheese and some dried venison. It is not much, but you look like you have been traveling hard." "Why would you help me?" Grakka asked suspiciously. This had to be a trick, some ploy to lower her guard so the others could attack. The man shrugged, a gesture that seemed genuinely helpless. "Because you saved us. My sister was one of the people Roderick took last month. They found her body in the ruins of the Miller farm, and she was only 14. You killed the man who murdered her, and my father stood in that crowd and called you monster for it. I could not let you walk away with nothing." He set the bundle on the ground between them and stepped back. "I am Benedict Oakes. My family farms land north of the village. If you need a place to rest for a day or two, we have a barn. It is not much, but it is warm and dry." Grakka stared at him, searching for the trap, the hidden angle. But his eyes were steady and sad, and his hands did not stray toward any concealed weapon. She had lived among humans long enough to read their body language, to sense when violence was coming. This man carried only grief and genuine gratitude. "Why would your family allow an orc in their barn?" she asked. "They would not," Benedict admitted. "My father shares the magistrate's views, but I work the north field, the one closest to the forest. There is a small shelter there, just a lean-to really, where I keep tools and sometimes sleep during harvest season. You could stay there and no one would need to know. And what would you want in return? Nothing in this world came free, especially not kindness toward orcs." Benedict flinched slightly as if she had slapped him. "Nothing. You want nothing in return for helping me." "I want nothing in return for offering you shelter. Perhaps that is how basic decency is supposed to work. Despite herself, Grakka felt the corner of her mouth twitch. It was not quite a smile, but it was closer than she had come in months. Basic decency. I have found that to be rarer than dragon's gold in human lands. I know. He scuffed his boot in the dirt, suddenly looking much younger. Most people only see what they expect to see. They hear orc and think of the war bands that raided the borderlands 20 years ago. They do not think about the fact that you might be as different from those warriors as I am different from Roderick the Red. But I have been thinking about that a lot, these past few weeks, wondering if the monster in the forest was really more human than the man who killed my sister. Grakka felt something in her chest crack, just slightly. She bent and picked up the bundle of food, weighing it in her hands. Real bread, not travel hardtack. Fresh cheese wrapped in cloth. Her stomach growled audibly, reminding her that she had not eaten since yesterday morning. "Show me this shelter," she said quietly. "I will stay one night, then I leave." Benedict's face lit up with obvious relief. "That is fair. Follow me. It is not far." He led her through the forest with the easy confidence of someone who knew every tree and game trail. They walked in silence for perhaps 20 minutes before emerging into a cleared field, wheat stubble poking up from the recently harvested earth. At the far edge stood a small wooden structure, 3 walls and a roof, open on one side. It was simple but sturdy, with a dirt floor and a few tools hanging from pegs. "There is a stream just beyond that line of trees," Benedict said, pointing. "Clean water. And I brought blankets this morning after I saw what happened." He gestured to a folded pile in the corner. "Like I said, it is not much, but it should keep the rain off." Grakka stepped into the shelter and set down her pack. It smelled of earth and old wood and honest labor, infinitely preferable to the stink of fear and anger that had filled the village square. "This is more than I expected," she said. "Thank you." Benedict shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly wanting to say something more but not sure how. Finally, he just nodded. "I will be working the near field tomorrow, repairing fences. If you need anything, just come find me, and do not worry about my father. He rarely comes this far out anymore. His knees pain him." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back. "What you did was brave. Facing Roderick alone, most men would not have had the courage. I hope you find somewhere better than this place, somewhere people see you for who you are instead of what you are." Before Grakka could respond, he was walking quickly back toward the forest, his shoulders hunched as if embarrassed by his own words. She watched him go, this strange human boy who offered kindness where none was required, and felt the crack in her chest widen just a bit more. She ate half the food Benedict had brought, forcing herself to save the rest for the next day. Then she wrapped herself in the surprisingly clean blankets and lay down on the packed earth floor, her sword within easy reach. Sleep came slowly, her mind replaying the scene in the village square, the magistrate's words, the way the crowd had looked at her with such naked fear and hatred. But beneath that, softer and more confusing, was the memory of Benedict's blue eyes meeting hers without flinching, his quiet assertion that she deserved basic decency. She woke before dawn to the sound of rain pattering on the roof, steady and cold. The shelter kept her dry, just as Benedict had promised. She lay there watching gray light filter across the field, trying to decide where to go next. West, maybe, toward the coast where she had heard there were cities large enough that one more orc might pass unnoticed. Or south, to the wild lands beyond the frontier where the law ran thin and a strong sword arm could make a living without questions. The sound of whistling cut through her thoughts. She sat up quickly, reaching for her blade, then forced herself to relax as Benedict emerged from the morning mist. He carried a wooden bucket in one hand and had a coil of rope over his shoulder. When he saw her sitting up, he raised a hand in greeting. "Good morning," he called. "I did not mean to wake you, just heading out to the fence line." Grakka stood and stepped out of the shelter, tilting her face up to let the rain wash away the last cobwebs of sleep. Benedict had stopped a respectful distance away, clearly giving her space. His clothes were already soaked through. "Your father will wonder why you came out in this weather," Grakka said. "Fences do not fix themselves, rain or shine. Besides, he is focused on the south fields today, trying to decide if we have time for one more planting before winter sets in." Benedict set down his bucket and studied her with those disconcertingly direct eyes. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough." Grakka hesitated, unused to genuine inquiry about her well-being. "The shelter is good, better than sleeping rough. I am glad." He smiled, and it transformed his face from merely pleasant to genuinely warm. "Listen, I know you said you were leaving today, but if you want to stay longer, the offer stands. Winter is coming on fast and the roads get dangerous once the snow starts." "I cannot stay," Grakka said, though something in her regretted the words even as they left her mouth. "Your people made their feelings clear yesterday. It is only a matter of time before someone sees me, and then there will be trouble for both of us." "Probably," Benedict agreed with a rueful shrug. "But I am a grown man with my own coin, and this is my field to work. If I want to offer shelter to the woman who killed Roderick the Red, that is my business." He paused, then added more quietly, "And I meant what I said yesterday. What they did was wrong. You deserved better." The rain was falling harder now, cold drops running down Grakka's neck and under her collar. Benedict was shivering slightly, though he seemed determined not to show it. On impulse, she made a decision that surprised even herself. "If I stay, I will work for my keep. I am strong. I can repair fences faster than you can, and I know how to plow fields and harvest grain. Let me help, and I will stay until the first snow. Then I leave." Benedict's eyebrows shot up. "You would work my field." "I cannot pay you anything, not like a proper wage, just food and shelter." "Food and shelter are enough," Grakka said. "But I will not hide like a criminal. If someone sees me working, they see me working. I am done apologizing for existing." For a long moment Benedict just looked at her, something shifting in his expression. Then he smiled again, wider this time, and nodded. "All right then, let us fix some fences." They worked through the morning in comfortable silence, Grakka following Benedict along the fence line that bordered the forest. Where posts had rotted or wire had come loose, she helped him dig new holes and set fresh wood. He had been right. She was stronger than him, able to drive posts deep with a few economical swings of the hammer that would have taken him dozens of blows to accomplish. But he worked with steady competence, his movements efficient and practiced, and she found herself respecting the quiet skill he brought to even these simple tasks. By midday, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight filtered through the clouds. Benedict produced more food from his pack, bread and hard cheese and apples from the autumn harvest, and they sat on a fallen log to eat. Grakka's stomach had stopped growling for the first time in days, and she felt something close to contentment stealing over her despite the chill in the air. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Benedict asked around a mouthful of apple. "The way you killed Roderick, I heard people talking about it in the tavern last night. They said you walked through his camp like death itself, barely got scratched." "My father was a weapons master," Grakka said. The words came easier than she expected. "In the mountain holds where I grew up, all children learn to fight. But he saw that I had a gift for it, so he trained me harder than the others. By the time I had seen 12 summers, I could best warriors twice my age in the practice ring." "What happened to your clan?" Benedict asked, then immediately looked stricken. "Sorry, that was rude. You do not have to answer." But Grakka found she wanted to answer, wanted to give voice to the story she had carried alone for so long. Human soldiers happened. There was a new lord in the borderlands, young and ambitious. He decided that the orc holds were a threat that needed to be eliminated. Never mind that we had held peace treaty for 30 years. He came with 200 men and siege weapons in the dead of winter when we were not prepared to fight. She stared at her hands, remembering the smell of smoke and blood, the screams of the dying. My father held the main gate while the elders tried to evacuate the children through the back tunnels. He held it for hours, him and a dozen other warriors against an entire army. They bought enough time for some of us to escape into the mountains. I was 16. My father made me promise to run to survive, to not throw my life away on revenge. Did you keep that promise? Benedict's voice was very quiet. Most days. Grakka met his eyes. I have killed humans who tried to kill me first. I have fought as a mercenary when I needed coin. But I have never sought vengeance against the Lord who ordered the attack, even though I know his name and where he lives. I keep my promises. Benedict was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Then he said, I am sorry for what happened to your people, for how you have been treated since. You deserved better then, and you deserve better now. The simple honesty of it, the lack of empty platitudes or qualifications, hit Grakka harder than she would have thought possible. She nodded once, not trusting herself to speak, and stood to return to work. They spent the rest of the afternoon finishing the fence line, and by the time the sun was setting, Benedict declared himself satisfied. That would have taken me 3 days alone, he said, stretching his back with a groan. You are worth 10 men, you know that, so I have been told, Grakka said dryly. Usually right before someone tries to pay me half what they would pay 1 man. Benedict laughed, surprised. Well, I am paying you nothing, so I suppose I cannot be accused of that particular crime. Come on, let us get you back to the shelter before it gets full dark. I will bring more supplies tomorrow. They walked back across the field together, and Grakka realized with some surprise that she was not eager for him to leave. His company had been easy, undemanding, more pleasant than any interaction she could remember having with a human in years. When they reached the shelter, Benedict turned to go but hesitated. Thank you, he said, for the help today, and for staying. I know it is not much, but it is nice to have someone to talk to who does not know every single story about me since I was born. What stories would those be? Grakka asked, surprising herself with the question. He grinned. Well, there was the time I accidentally set fire to the magistrate's prize haystack trying to impress a girl with my tinderbox skills. And the time I got drunk at Harvest Festival and tried to fight the blacksmith's apprentice, who has about 6 inches and 40 pounds on me. And the time I told Mary Thornton I loved her in front of the entire church congregation, only to find out she was already betrothed to someone else. Despite herself, Grakka felt a smile tugging at her mouth. You seem to have a talent for trouble. I prefer to think of it as a talent for living enthusiastically, Benedict said with mock dignity. Then his expression turned more serious. But really, thank you. Today was good, better than good. He left before Grakka could figure out how to respond to that, disappearing into the gathering darkness. She stood outside the shelter for a long time, watching stars emerge in the clearing sky, and tried to understand the strange warmth that had settled in her chest. The pattern established itself over the following days. Benedict would arrive each morning with food and a cheerful greeting, and they would work together on whatever task the farm demanded. They cleared drainage ditches and hauled stones from the field and prepared the earth for winter. Benedict talked while they worked, an endless stream of stories about village life and his family, and the small dramas that unfolded in a community where everyone knew everyone else. Grakka found herself listening with more interest than she wanted to admit, sometimes even offering her own stories in return. Stories about her travels, about strange towns and stranger people she had encountered, carefully edited to remove the worst violence and prejudice. She told him about the time she had worked as a guard for a merchant caravan, protecting a shipment of silk and spices across the western mountains. She told him about the old hermit woman who lived in the deep forest and claimed to speak with trees. She told him about the summer she had spent as a bouncer in a rough tavern by the docks, breaking up fights and ejecting drunks, until the owner's son tried to cheat her on wages, and she left before she did something she would regret. Benedict listened to all of it with rapt attention, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested rather than just being polite. He wanted to know about orc culture, about the food she had grown up eating, and the songs her mother had sung. He asked about her beliefs and her dreams, treating each answer like a gift to be treasured. It was deeply uncomfortable and strangely addictive all at once. A week passed, then two. The nights grew colder and the days shorter. Benedict brought heavier blankets and a small brazier that could be lit for warmth on the coldest nights. He brought books borrowed from the village teacher, leather-bound volumes of poetry and history that Grakka read by firelight. She had learned to read human common tongue years ago, taught by a merchant who needed someone to inventory his warehouse, and it pleased her to discover that she had not lost the skill. 3 weeks after she had first arrived at the shelter, Benedict showed up before dawn carrying a large basket. "I have a surprise," he announced, looking absurdly pleased with himself. "We are taking the day off." Grakka raised an eyebrow. "Does your father know you are abandoning your work?" "I told him I was meeting with the grain merchant in the next village over to discuss prices for next year's crop." "Which is technically true, I do need to do that eventually," he grinned. "But first we are going fishing." "Fishing," Grakka repeated flatly. "Yes, fishing. That thing where you sit by water and catch fish. Come on, when was the last time you did something just because it was pleasant? Not for money or survival, just for the joy of it." Grakka could not actually remember the last time, which might have proven his point. She let him lead her deeper into the forest, following a stream that burbled over smooth stones. After about an hour of walking, they emerged at a wide pool where the water ran slow and deep. Massive oak trees overhung the banks, their leaves gone gold and red with autumn, and the morning sun turned the surface of the water into hammered bronze. "My secret place," Benedict said, spreading a blanket on a flat section of bank. "I have been coming here since I was a boy. No one else knows about it except you now." He set up 2 fishing poles, simple affairs of willow branches and gut line, and showed Grakka how to bait the hook with fat earthworms from a tin he had brought. They sat side by side on the blanket, poles propped on forked sticks driven into the mud, and waited in companionable silence. The peace of it sank into Grakka's bones. She had spent so many years moving, fighting, surviving, always watching for the next threat. Sitting here beside this quiet stream with Benedict's shoulder warm against hers, she felt something she had not experienced since childhood. Safety. The illusion that the world might be gentle instead of cruel, at least for a little while. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly, not looking at him. "The shelter, the food, bringing me here. What do you want from me, Benedict?" She felt him turn to look at her, but she kept her eyes on the water. "I want to be your friend," he said simply. "Is that so difficult to believe?" "Yes," Grakka said bluntly. "Humans do not befriend orcs. They fear us or hate us or occasionally use us, but they do not sit beside us and share secret fishing spots." Benedict was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, His voice was thoughtful. "Do you know what I thought when I saw you in the village square? I thought, there stands someone brave enough to do what needed doing, even knowing she would get no thanks for it. There stands someone who fights for what is right even when the world offers nothing but cruelty in return. And I thought, that is who I want to be. That is the kind of person worth knowing." Grakka's chest felt tight. "You do not know me, not really. I have done things I am not proud of, killed people who probably did not deserve it. I am not some noble hero." "No one is," Benedict said. "We are all just people trying to do our best with what we have been given. You have been given more hardship than anyone should have to bear, and you are still here, still fighting, still trying. That matters." One of the poles jerked suddenly, lines singing out. Benedict lunged for it, nearly tumbling into the water in his excitement. Grakka grabbed the back of his shirt, hauling him upright, and together they wrestled the fish to shore. It was a fine trout, silver-scaled and thrashing with furious life. Benedict crowed with delight, and Grakka found herself laughing, actually laughing, the sound rusty and strange in her own ears. They caught 3 more fish over the course of the morning. Benedict cleaned them with a knife from his belt, working with the easy competence he brought to all physical tasks, and wrapped them in leaves to carry home. They ate the lunch he had packed, bread and soft cheese and late-season strawberries that stained their fingers red. The sun climbed high and then began its descent, and still they sat by the water, talking about nothing and everything. Benedict told her about his dreams of seeing the ocean someday, of traveling beyond the small world of his family's farm. Grakka told him about the year she had spent working on a ship, the bone-deep terror and exhilaration of storms at sea. They argued amiably about whether bacon or sausage was superior, whether summer or autumn was the best season, whether the old king had been wise or merely lucky in his dealings with the northern kingdoms. It was late afternoon by the time they packed up and started back. Benedict insisted on carrying both the fish and his basket, leaving Grakka free to walk with her hands swinging at her sides. The forest was full of bird song and the rustle of small creatures in the undergrowth, and she felt more relaxed than she could remember being in her entire adult life. They were halfway back to the farm when 3 men stepped out of the trees to block their path. Grakka's hand went immediately to her sword hilt, her body shifting into a fighting stance. The men were armed with woodcutting axes and carried themselves with the aggressive confidence of people who believed they held the moral high ground. She recognized one of them from the village, a thick-necked man who had been at the front of the crowd in the square. "Well, well," the man said, his voice dripping false friendliness. "Young Benedict Oakes walking in the woods with an orc. Your father know about this boy." "What I do on my own land is my business, Thomas," Benedict said. His voice was level, but Grakka could hear the tension beneath it. "Step aside." Thomas made no move to comply. "See, that is where you are wrong. When you bring monsters into our territory, it becomes everyone's business, especially when said monster has been lurking around for near about a month now." "She is not lurking," Benedict said, and Grakka heard anger creeping into his tone. "She is working my field, helping with the harvest preparations, not that it is any concern of yours. Everything that threatens this village is my concern. I am on the watch appointed by the magistrate himself." Thomas shifted his grip on his axe. "We have been hearing things, livestock going missing, strange sounds in the night, and here we have an orc camped on the edge of our lands. Seems like an obvious connection to me." "Grakka has not touched anyone's livestock," Benedict said flatly. "And if you had proof she had, you would have brought the whole watch, not just your 2 drinking buddies." That hit home. Thomas's face flushed dark red. "You calling me a liar, boy?" I am calling you a bully and a coward, Benedict said, and Grakka felt a spike of alarm at the recklessness in his voice. You see someone you can push around and you jump at the chance. Never mind truth or justice or basic decency. Thomas took a step forward, raising his axe. I think it is time someone taught you some respect. Grakka moved without thinking, putting herself between Benedict and the three men. Her sword cleared its sheath with a whisper of steel, the point coming up to rest inches from Thomas's throat. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The promise of violence was written in every line of her body. Thomas went very still, the color draining from his face. See, he said, his voice cracking slightly. See how quick she goes to violence. This is what I am talking about. She is dangerous. She is protecting me from you, Benedict said. He stepped up beside Grakka, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. You came here looking for a fight, Thomas. Do not pretend otherwise. For a long moment the forest was silent except for the hammering of Grakka's heart in her ears. She knew she could kill all three men if she had to. They were farmers playing at being warriors, holding wood-cutting axes like weapons. But she also knew what it would mean. She would have to run, would spend the rest of her life knowing she had proved their prejudices right, that the orc had turned violent just as they all expected. Then Benedict did something that shocked everyone present. He reached out and gently pushed down on Grakka's sword arm, lowering her blade. We are leaving now, he said calmly, and you are going to let us pass. Because if you do not, I will go straight to the magistrate and tell him that 3 members of the village watch threatened an unarmed man on his own property, which is a violation of your charter. And then I will tell him about the time you and your friends got drunk and vandalized the church, which I happened to witness but never reported. Thomas's face went through several interesting expressions before settling on sullen acceptance. This is not over, he muttered. Yes, it is, Benedict said. Come on, Grakka. He walked forward, and after a moment's hesitation the men stepped aside. Grakka kept her sword drawn as she followed, moving backward so she could watch them. Only when they had put 100 yards between themselves and the confrontation did she sheath her blade. That was incredibly stupid, she said, her voice shaking with residual adrenaline. He could have killed you. He was never going to hurt me, Benedict said. He was shaking too, she realized, his hands trembling as he adjusted his grip on the basket. Thomas is a blowhard and a bully, but he is not actually dangerous, not to other humans anyway. You do not know that. You took a huge risk. For you, Benedict said, stopping to face her. I took a risk for you because you deserve someone to stand up for you for once, because you are worth it. Grakka stared at him, words dying in her throat. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her chest ache, his blue eyes fierce and unwavering. And she realized with a jolt of pure terror that something had shifted between them, something fundamental and impossible to take back. We should go, she managed, before they change their minds about letting us leave. They walked the rest of the way in silence, but Grakka was intensely aware of every movement Benedict made beside her, every breath he took. When they reached the shelter, he set down the basket and fish and turned to face her again. They are not going to let this go, he said quietly. Thomas will tell everyone and then there will be real trouble. You should leave, tonight before they can organize something worse. I know, Grakka said. The words tasted like ash, but I do not want you to. Benedict took a step closer. I want you to stay. I want to keep fishing with you and working the fields and arguing about breakfast meats. I want to show you the oak grove where the oldest tree in the county grows. I want to teach you how to make my mother's apple pie recipe, even though I am terrible at it. I want things I have no right to want. Benedict, Grakka said, and heard the warning in her own voice. I know, he said. I know it is impossible. I know the world would never accept it. But I need you to know before you go that this has been the best month of my entire life. And it is because of you." Grakka felt something breaking inside her, all the careful walls she had built to protect herself from exactly this kind of pain. "You do not understand what you are saying. There is no future where this ends well. I am an orc. You are human. Your people hate mine. My clan would cast me out for even considering a human partner. We would be alone, both of us, rejected by everyone." "I know," Benedict said again, "and I am still saying it. Because you deserve to know that someone sees you, Grakka. Not an orc, not a monster, not even a warrior, just you. And thinks you are wonderful." He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and took her hand. His fingers were warm and calloused from farm work, rough in all the places hers were smooth, and smooth in all the places hers were rough. They fit together like pieces of different puzzles that somehow interlocked anyway. "I have to go," Grakka whispered. "You know that. I know. But not tonight. Stay tonight. Let me pretend for one more day that the world is kinder than it actually is." Grakka knew she should refuse. Knew that staying would only make leaving harder, would only deepen the wound she could already feel opening in her chest. But she looked at Benedict's face, at the hope and sadness warring in his expression, and found she could not say no. "One more day," she agreed. Benedict's smile was bright enough to hurt. "Then let us make it a good one." He built a fire in front of the shelter, breaking his own rule about avoiding smoke that might be spotted from the farm. He cooked the fish they had caught, seasoning them with herbs from his pocket and wrapping them in leaves to roast in the coals. They tasted like heaven, tender and flaky and flavored with wood smoke. They ate with their fingers, licking the juice from their hands, and shared the last of Benedict's apple cider. Full dark fell, and the stars came out, more than Grakka had ever seen, a river of light spilling across the black expanse of sky. Benedict pointed out constellations, telling her the stories behind them. The hunter and the bear, the lovers and the dragon, ancient myths about heroes and gods. Grakka countered with the orc star stories, different patterns seen by her people in the same arrangements of light. The father and the storm, the mountain and the river, tales of creation and destruction that went back generations beyond counting. "I love that," Benedict said softly, "that we look at the same sky and see different truths and both are valid." "My father used to say that truth is like water," Grakka said. "It takes the shape of whatever contains it, but it is still water underneath, still necessary, still life-giving. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was. I miss him every day." They sat in companionable silence, shoulders touching, watching the fire burn down to embers. Grakka felt the minutes passing like sand through her fingers, each one precious and painful because she knew they were limited. Finally, when the cold became too much to ignore, Benedict stood and stretched. "I should get back before my father sends out a search party, but I will be here at dawn and we will figure out what comes next, together." He squeezed her shoulder once, a brief touch that burned like a brand, and then he was gone into the darkness. Grakka sat alone by the dying fire and tried not to think about how much it was going to hurt to walk away from this place. From him. She woke to shouting and the smell of smoke. Grakka was on her feet with her sword in hand before she was fully conscious, body moving on pure combat instinct. Orange light flickered through the trees, too bright to be dawn, too hot to be anything but fire. She ran toward it, toward the source of the shouting, and emerged from the tree line to see Benedict's family farmhouse burning. Flames licked from the windows and ate at the thatched roof, turning the night into searing brightness. People ran back and forth carrying buckets of water from the well. a pathetically inadequate response to the inferno consuming the building. Grakka's eyes scanned the chaos, looking for Benedict, and found him dragging a man away from a window that had just exploded outward in a shower of glass and sparks. She sprinted across the field, sheathing her sword as she ran. Benedict saw her coming, and his face transformed with relief and fear all at once. "My mother is still inside," he shouted over the roar of the flames. "Upstairs, eastern bedroom. I tried to go in, but the stairs are blocked." Grakka did not pause to think, did not stop to calculate the odds. She just ran straight at the burning building, took 3 running steps up the stone wall using protruding bricks as handholds, and launched herself through the second-story window in a crash of breaking glass. The heat inside was like being punched in the face. Smoke filled her lungs, making her choke and gag. She dropped to a crouch where the air was slightly clearer and oriented herself. "Eastern bedroom," Benedict had said. She crawled along the hallway, feeling doors until she found one that opened into a room with a bed and dresser. A woman lay crumpled on the floor, overcome by smoke. Grakka gathered her up, shocked at how light she was, and looked for a way out. The hallway was a tunnel of fire now, the way she had come impassable. Grakka turned to the window, saw it was too small for both of them to fit through. She ripped the blanket from the bed, wrapped the woman in it, and then did the only thing she could think of. She kicked out the entire window frame with one powerful strike, wood splintering away from the wall, and jumped. They fell together, Grakka twisting in midair to take the impact on her own back. She hit the ground hard enough to drive the air from her lungs, but she kept her arms locked around the woman, protecting her from the worst of it. For a moment she lay there stunned, staring up at the burning building, wondering if she had broken something important. Then hands were pulling at her, voices shouting, and she let them take the woman from her arms. Benedict's face appeared above her, streaked with soot and tears. "Grakka. Grakka, can you hear me? Are you hurt?" "I am fine," she rasped, though her back screamed in protest when she tried to sit up. "Your mother, alive, breathing. You saved her." His hands were on her face, wiping away ash and blood from where flying glass had cut her. "You could have died." "But I did not." Grakka managed to get to her feet, swaying only slightly. Around them, the farmhouse groaned and then collapsed inward, the roof caving in with a tremendous crash and a fountain of sparks. The people trying to fight the fire fell back, recognizing defeat. The house was lost, but everyone had made it out alive. An older man who bore a strong resemblance to Benedict pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with grief as he watched his home burn. Benedict's father, Grakka realized, the man who shared the magistrate's views on orcs. He looked at Grakka, and his expression went through a complicated series of changes. "You saved Martha," he said finally, his voice rough. "You went into a burning building and saved my wife." "Anyone would have done the same," Grakka said. "No," the older man said. "They would not have. Most people would have stood here and watched her die rather than risk themselves." He looked at Benedict, then back to Grakka, and something in his face softened. "Thank you. I do not know how we will ever repay that debt." "There is no debt," Grakka said. She felt lightheaded, whether from smoke inhalation or shock she could not say. "I am just glad I was here." The magistrate arrived with a dozen men from the village, having been roused by the glow of the fire. He took in the scene with sharp eyes, noting Grakka's presence and the way Benedict stood close to her, protective. "What happened here?" he demanded. "Fire started in the kitchen," Benedict's father said. "My fault, I think. I must have left embers in the stove when I banked it for the night. Whole thing went up faster than I would have believed possible." But Grakka had been examining the remains of the building, and something did not sit right. The fire had burned too hot, spread too fast, especially for an accidental kitchen fire. She walked closer to the ruins, ignoring the residual heat, and kicked aside a charred beam. Underneath, she found the broken remains of a clay jug, the kind used for lamp oil. "This was not an accident," she said quietly. The crowd went silent. Benedict came to stand beside her, looking down at the evidence. "Someone did this deliberately," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "Someone tried to burn my family alive in their beds." Thomas pushed to the front of the crowd, his face a mask of false concern that did not quite hide the flicker of fear in his eyes. "Now let us not jump to conclusions. Could be that jug was in storage, just happened to break in the heat." "In the kitchen," Benedict said acidly. "We keep our lamp oil in the barn. Everyone knows that. Someone brought this here. Someone started this fire on purpose." Grakka looked at Thomas, saw the guilt written in every line of his body, and knew. He had done this, or had it done, trying to get rid of the orc problem by eliminating the human who sheltered her. The rage that rose up in her was white-hot, hotter than any fire. She took a step toward him and watched him flinch backward. "No," Benedict said, grabbing her arm. "Do not. He is not worth it. He tried to murder your family," Grakka growled, "and we will prove it, and he will face justice. The proper way." Benedict's grip was firm, anchoring her. "Please, trust me." Grakka forced herself to breathe, to think past the fury. Benedict was right. If she attacked Thomas now, even with provocation, it would only confirm every prejudice the villagers held about orcs. She would be the monster they expected, and Benedict would be caught in the aftermath. The magistrate was no fool. He had been watching the exchange with intelligent eyes, and now he turned to Thomas. "Where were you tonight?" "Home in bed," Thomas said quickly. "Ask my wife." "I will, and I will also be asking questions about who might have had reason to set this fire. Who might have felt threatened by the presence of an orc on the Oak's property." His tone made it clear he had his own suspicions. "In the meantime, Thomas, you are confined to your home until further notice." Thomas opened his mouth to protest, saw the flat warning in the magistrate's expression, and closed it again. He slunk away into the darkness, followed by the hard stares of half the village. The magistrate turned to Benedict's father. "You and your family will need a place to stay. I can arrange for the church hall to be open tonight, and we will organize a building party to start reconstruction as soon as possible." "Thank you," the older man said. He looked at Grakka again, his expression unreadable. "And thank you," he said to her, "for my wife's life. Whatever differences we might have, that debt is real, and I will remember it." It was not an apology for his previous behavior, but it was more than Grakka had expected. She nodded once, accepting the words in the spirit they were offered. The crowd began to disperse, families heading home with promises to return in the morning with food and tools to help. Benedict's mother had been carried to the church already, tended by the village healer. Only Benedict and his father remained, staring at the smoking ruins of their home. "I should go," Grakka said quietly. "This is my fault. If I had left when I should have, none of this would have happened." "No," Benedict's father said sharply. "This is the fault of whoever set the fire. You do not get to claim responsibility for another person's evil." He rubbed his face, looking suddenly exhausted. "Benedict tells me you have been working our north field, doing good work. Is that true?" "Yes, sir," Grakka said, surprised by the question. "Then you will continue to do so. We are going to need all the help we can get rebuilding. If you are willing to stay and work, you will be paid a fair wage and given proper shelter, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." Benedict stared at his father in shock. "Da, are you serious?" "I have been wrong about a lot of things," the older man said heavily. "Held views I am not proud of, based on fear rather than sense. But an orc just risked her life to save my wife, and I will not dishonor that by clinging to old prejudices. So yes, I am serious. If she will stay, we would be honored to have her help." Grakka felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, hot and unwelcome. She had not cried in years, had taught herself that tears were weakness. But this grudging acceptance from a man who had every reason to hate her, broke something loose inside her chest. "I will stay," she said. "And I will help rebuild. You have my word." Benedict's smile was like the sun coming out after a storm. "Then let us get to work." The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. The village turned out in force to help rebuild the Oaks farmhouse, apparently shamed by Grakka's heroism into setting aside their fear. She worked longer and harder than anyone, hauling timber and mixing mortar and setting stones with tireless efficiency. By day she labored alongside the other workers, and by night she retreated to the shelter that Benedict had expanded into a proper small cabin, adding walls and a better roof. Slowly, grudgingly, the villagers began to accept her presence. They stopped crossing the street to avoid her. They nodded when she passed, and eventually some even offered greetings. The children were first to truly warm to her, fascinated by her green skin and tusks, begging for stories about her travels. Grakka found herself telling them edited tales of adventure and distant lands, leaving out the violence but keeping the wonder. Benedict's mother recovered from the smoke inhalation and made a point of visiting Grakka to thank her personally. She brought food, proper home-cooked meals that made Grakka's chest ache with memories of her own mother's cooking. Martha Oakes was a small woman with kind eyes and Benedict's same open smile, and she treated Grakka with simple courtesy that was more precious than gold. Thomas was found guilty of arson after 2 of his drinking companions broke under the magistrate's questioning and confessed to helping him. He was sentenced to 5 years' labor on the road gangs, building the new highway to the capital. His co-conspirators received lighter sentences, but were barred from serving on the village watch ever again. Justice was served, and the threat was removed through it all. Grakka and Benedict worked side by side, their friendship deepening into something neither of them was quite ready to name. He sought her out constantly, finding excuses to bring her water or show her a new technique or simply talk. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what he was doing, whether he was warm enough, whether he had eaten. It was ridiculous and terrifying and wonderful all at once. 6 weeks after the fire, the new farmhouse was complete. It was smaller than the original but sturdily built, with good stone walls and a slate roof that would not burn. The village threw a celebration to mark its completion, a harvest festival combined with a house warming. Tables were set up in the field, laden with food and ale, and someone brought out fiddles for dancing. Grakka stood at the edge of the celebration, nursing a cup of cider and watching the festivities with mixed feelings. She had been invited, explicitly and warmly, but she still felt like an outsider looking in. These were not her people, not her traditions. She was tolerated now, even grudgingly respected, but she would never truly belong. "Stop brooding and come dance," Benedict said, appearing at her elbow with his hair mussed and his cheeks flushed from exertion. "I do not dance," Grakka said. "Everyone dances. It is a fundamental part of being alive." He grabbed her hand and tugged. "Come on, I will teach you. It is easy." "Benedict, I weigh half again what you do and I have no idea what I am doing. I will step on your feet. Then I will limp tomorrow and it will be worth it. Please." Grakka sighed but let him pull her toward the makeshift dance floor. The music was fast and cheerful, some traditional tune everyone seemed to know. Benedict showed her the basic steps, laughing when she got them wrong, patiently correcting until she started to get the rhythm. They spun and stomped with the other dancers, and Grakka found herself actually enjoying it despite her self-consciousness. The music changed to something slower, couples pairing off for a more intimate dance. Benedict pulled her close, one hand on her waist, the other clasping hers. They swayed together, and Grakka became intensely aware of how near he was, how warm, how solid. His eyes met hers, and there was something there, something that made her breath catch. "I am glad you stayed," he said quietly. "So am I. When I thought you were going to leave, after the confrontation with Thomas, I realized something. I realized that I did not want to imagine my life without you in it, that somewhere along the way you had become the most important person in my world." Grakka's heart was hammering so hard she was sure he must be able to feel it. "Benedict, we talked about this. There is no future where this works. Maybe not, but there is a present, here now this moment, and I do not want to waste it being afraid." He pulled back slightly to look at her face. "I am not asking for forever. I am not asking you to make promises you cannot keep. I am just asking if you feel what I feel, if this thing between us is real for you too." Grakka looked at him, at his honest blue eyes and hopeful expression, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. "It is real," she whispered. "It terrifies me, but it is real." Benedict's smile could have lit the night. "Then that is enough. For now, that is enough." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle and questioning, tasting of apple cider and hope. Grakka kissed him back, throwing caution to the wind, one hand coming up to cup the back of his head and pull him closer. Around them, the music played and people danced, but Grakka was only aware of Benedict, of the way he sighed against her mouth, of the way his arms tightened around her waist. When they finally pulled apart, breathing hard, Grakka saw that several people were watching them with expressions ranging from shock to disapproval to cautious acceptance. She tensed, waiting for someone to object, to say something cruel. But Benedict's father was among the watchers, and he caught Grakka's eye and nodded once, a gesture of approval that meant more than any words. "Let them talk," Benedict murmured. "I do not care anymore." "You might regret that," Grakka said, but she was smiling. "I doubt it." They danced until the music ended, and then they walked together back toward the cabin, fingers interlaced. The night was cold and clear, stars brilliant overhead. Grakka felt lighter than she had in years, as if some enormous weight she had been carrying had finally been set down. Winter came on hard and fast after that, snow falling in thick blankets that covered the fields and forests. Work on the farm slowed to the maintenance tasks, tending animals and repairing tools and preparing for spring planting. Grakka spent her days helping the Oaks family with whatever needed doing, and her nights in the cabin with Benedict, learning what it meant to be loved and to love in return. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Benedict told her about his childhood, about the time he nearly drowned in the river and his terror of deep water ever since. Grakka told him about the nightmares that still woke her sometimes, visions of her burning home and her father's last stand. They held each other through the dark moments and celebrated the light ones, building something fragile and precious between them. The village acceptance continued to grow, though it was not universal. Some people would never see past Grakka's green skin, would never trust an orc in their midst. But enough people did, enough that she could walk through the village without fear, could shop at the market and drink in the tavern. It was more than she had ever hoped for. One evening in deep winter, Benedict's father invited Grakka to dinner at the new farmhouse. It was a formal occasion, the table set with the good dishes, Martha wearing her best dress. Grakka felt nervous, though she could not say why. She had eaten with the family dozens of times by now. They made small talk through the meal, discussing the coming spring planting and the prospects for the year ahead. Then Benedict's father set down his fork and looked at Grakka directly. "I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "I treated you poorly when you first came here. I saw an orc and made assumptions, held prejudices that were not based in truth or experience. You have proven yourself to be a woman of honor and courage, and I am ashamed that I could not see that from the start." Grakka swallowed hard. "Thank you. That means a great deal. I also want you to know that you have a place here for as long as you want it, not just as a worker but as part of this community, part of this family if you are willing." Grakka glanced at Benedict, who was watching her with barely contained hope. "I do not understand." "Benedict has told us how he feels about you," Martha said gently, "and how you feel about him. We see how you look at each other, how you care for one another. It is clear that this is not some passing fancy. In our family," Benedict's father continued, "when two people love each other and want to build a life together, they marry. It is a formal recognition of their commitment, a public declaration that they are partners in all things. I know that your people have different traditions, and I know that an orc-human marriage is unusual, possibly even unheard of. But if it is something you want, you would have our blessing." Grakka felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "You would accept me as your daughter-in-law." "Even knowing what it would mean, the talk it would cause. People will always talk," Martha said with a shrug. "But they will also see that we do not care, and eventually they will accept it too. You saved my life, Grakka. You gave me back to my family. How could I do anything but welcome you into it?" Grakka looked at Benedict, who had gone very still. "Is this what you want?" she asked him. "More than anything," he said quietly. "But only if you want it too. I will not pressure you. If this is not what you need, we can continue as we are, and I will be grateful for every day." Grakka thought about her father, about the promises she had made to survive and build a new life. She thought about the years of wandering, of never belonging, of being seen as a monster by everyone she met. And she thought about Benedict, about his kindness and courage, about the way he saw her as a person rather than as an orc, about the life they could build together in this place that had slowly become home. "I want it," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill over. "I want to marry you, Benedict Oakes. I want to build a life with you. I want to belong somewhere, and I choose here." Benedict's face split into a grin so wide it looked painful. He stood and pulled her to her feet, then kissed her thoroughly while his parents politely looked away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Martha was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief and Benedict's father was smiling. "Then we will start the preparations," Martha said. "A spring wedding, I think, after the planting is done but before the heat of summer sets in. We will do it properly, with the whole village invited." The winter passed in a flurry of planning and preparation. Grakka learned that human weddings were complicated affairs, requiring specific ceremonies and traditions. Martha took charge of most of it, clearly delighted to have a wedding to organize. She commissioned a dress from the village seamstress, a beautiful gown of deep green that complemented Grakka's skin tone. Benedict worked with the carpenter to build new furniture for the cabin, expanding it into a proper home for two. The village reaction was mixed, but generally positive. Some people objected on principle, muttering about the sanctity of human traditions and the dangers of mixing races. But the magistrate made it clear that he would officiate the wedding himself, lending his authority to the union. And Benedict's father, respected in the community for his hard work and fair dealing, made it known that anyone who caused trouble at his son's wedding would answer to him personally. Spring arrived in a rush of green growth and warming air. The fields were plowed and planted, the forest came alive with bird song. And on a bright morning in late spring, Grakka walked down an aisle of flower petals toward Benedict, who waited at the altar with tears streaming down his face. She wore the green dress and flowers in her hair, and she had never felt more beautiful or more terrified. The village had turned out in force, filling every seat and lining the aisles. Some faces were friendly, some skeptical, but all were watching. This was a moment of change, a line being drawn between the old ways and something new. The magistrate performed the ceremony with solemn dignity, speaking the ancient words about love and partnership and the joining of two souls. Benedict made his vows in a clear, strong voice, promising to love and honor her all his days. Grakka made her own vows, speaking in her native tongue first and then translating to human common, promising to stand beside him through whatever challenges came. When the magistrate pronounced them married, Benedict kissed her and the crowd erupted in applause. Not everyone clapped, Grakka noticed, but enough did. Enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, the world was capable of changing after all. The celebration lasted long into the night. Tables groaned under the weight of food, ale flowed freely, and the musicians played until their fingers were sore. Grakka danced with Benedict and his father and what felt like half the village, accepting congratulations and well wishes with a grace she had not known she possessed. When the magistrate approached with a glass of wine and a serious expression, she braced herself for some final lecture. But he simply raised his glass and said, "To the woman who defeated the Bandit King and saved this village, even when we did not deserve her heroism. May your marriage be long and happy, Grakka Oaks." The use of her new surname, Benedict's family name now hers as well, made Grakka's throat tight. She raised her own glass in return. "Thank you, for giving us your blessing and for seeing past what I am to who I am. I am old enough to know that wisdom sometimes comes from unexpected places," the magistrate said. "You taught this village an important lesson about judging people by their actions rather than their appearance. I hope we have learned it." Later, as the celebration finally wound down and the guests began to drift home, Benedict pulled Grakka aside and led her away from the crowd. They walked hand in hand to the oak grove he had promised to show her all those months ago, where ancient trees towered overhead and the air felt thick with magic. "I have something for you," Benedict said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small carved figure, a bear rendered in dark wood with exquisite detail. "I made this over the winter. It is not much, but I wanted you to have something that represented us. The bear is strong and fierce, but also protective and nurturing, like you." Grakka turned the carving over in her hands, marveling at the craftsmanship. "It is beautiful, thank you." "Thank you," Benedict said seriously, "for staying, for giving us a chance, for teaching me that love is stronger than fear, and that the world is better when we choose compassion over prejudice." "I think we taught each other that," Grakka said. She pulled him close, resting her forehead against his. "I love you, Benedict Oaks." "I never thought I would say those words to anyone, never thought I would find someone who could see past my skin to my heart. But you did, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for it." "I love you too," Benedict whispered, "my fierce, brave, wonderful wife." They stood together in the grove as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, Grakka could hear the last of the celebration breaking up, people calling goodbyes and heading home. Her home now, too. This village, this family, this man beside her. She had set out hunting a bounty and found something infinitely more valuable, a place to belong, a person to love, a future bright with possibility. The years that followed were not always easy. There were still people who looked at Grakka with distrust, who muttered about the orc woman who had married into the Oaks family. There were occasional traders from other regions who caused problems, not understanding the unusual acceptance this village had found. But Benedict and Grakka faced each challenge together, backed by family and friends who had learned to see past surface differences. They worked the farm side by side, Grakka's strength and Benedict's skill combining to make their land the most productive in the region. They became known for their hospitality, their door always open to travelers and those in need. And slowly, word spread to other communities about the village where an orc and a human had married, where old prejudices had been set aside in favor of understanding. Other orcs began to find their way to Millfield, tentatively at first, testing whether the stories were true. Grakka welcomed them, helped them find work and housing, taught them how to navigate human society. Some stayed, some moved on, but all left with the knowledge that there were places in the world where they might be accepted as individuals rather than judged as monsters. 3 years after their wedding, Martha Oakes passed away peacefully in her sleep, her hand held by her husband. The whole village mourned her, but none more than Grakka, who had found in Martha the mother she thought she had lost forever. They buried her in the church cemetery, and Grakka carved her headstone herself, working the marble with the same careful attention she brought to all things. Benedict's father lived another 5 years before joining his wife, growing old with grace and dignity. On his deathbed, he called Grakka to his side and pressed a leather pouch into her hands. "This was meant to be Benedict's inheritance," he said, his voice thin but clear. "But I want you to have it. You are as much my child as he is, and you have brought more joy and honor to this family than I ever dreamed possible." Inside was the deed to the farm, signed over to both Benedict and Grakka, making them equal partners in the land. Grakka wept as the old man breathed his last, mourning the father-in-law who had overcome his own prejudices to embrace her as family. More years passed. Benedict and Grakka grew middle-aged together, their love deepening with time and shared experience. The village continued to change, slowly becoming more diverse as other non-humans found their way to the community that had learned acceptance. Grakka became something of a leader, advocating for fair treatment and equal opportunities, using her voice to speak for those who had none. On the 20th anniversary of the day, she had walked into Millfield carrying Roderick's severed head. The village threw a celebration in Grakka's honor. The magistrate, now elderly but still sharp, gave a speech about how one woman's courage had changed an entire community, had opened eyes and hearts to the possibility of a different world. Grakka stood before the assembled crowd, Benedict's hand warm in hers, and looked out at faces that ranged from human to half-orc children who represented a future she had helped create. She thought about the young woman she had been, rootless and angry, carrying the weight of loss and rejection. And she thought about the woman she had become, rooted and loved, carrying instead the weight of responsibility and hope. 20 years ago, I came here expecting nothing but payment for a job completed, she said, her voice carrying across the square. I was shown fear and hatred, treated like a monster despite having just saved you all. And I very nearly walked away forever, convinced that humans would never see past what I am. She smiled, squeezing Benedict's hand. But one man had the courage to see me as a person, to offer kindness when none was required, and that one act of decency changed everything. It changed me. It changed him, and eventually it changed all of you. She looked around the crowd, meeting as many eyes as she could. I cannot take credit for the transformation of this village. That credit belongs to all of you, to everyone who chose understanding over fear, who chose to give someone different a chance. You proved that change is possible, that old hatreds can be overcome, that we can build something better together. The crowd erupted in applause. Children rushed forward, both human and orc, clamoring for Grakka's attention. She laughed and knelt to greet them, accepting sticky-handed hugs and breathless compliments. These children had never known a world where orcs and humans could not marry, could not be friends and neighbors and family. They took diversity as normal, as simply the way things were. And that, Grakka thought, was perhaps the greatest victory of all. That night, alone with Benedict in the home they had built together, Grakka stood at the window looking out over the moonlit fields. Benedict came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how far we have come. About how scared I was that day I met you, how certain that no good could come from staying. About how wrong I was." She turned in his arms to face him. "About how grateful I am that you were brave enough to see past my skin to my heart." "I think you were the brave one," Benedict said. "You were the one who took the risk, who stayed despite having every reason to leave. You were the one who dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world could be different." "We were both brave," Grakka said, "and we built something beautiful together. A life, a family, a community that proves love is stronger than hate." "To many more years of that," Benedict said and kissed her. They stood together in the darkness, two souls bound by choice and courage, living proof that the world could change one act of kindness at a time. Grakka had defeated the Bandit King alone, had saved a village that feared her. But in the end, she had defeated something far more dangerous than any criminal. She had defeated the prejudice and hatred that said orcs and humans could never truly coexist as equals. And in doing so, she had saved not just a village, but herself. She had found the home she thought she had lost forever, found family and love and belonging in the last place she expected. The road had been hard and the journey long, but standing here in Benedict's arms, looking out over land that was truly hers, Grakka knew that every struggle had been worth it. She had come to Millfield as a monster in their eyes, green-skinned and tusked and terrifying. She had become Grakka Oaks, wife and farmer and hero, living proof that what we are born as matters far less than who we choose to become. And she would spend the rest of her days making sure that no one else would have to fight as hard as she had for the simple dignity of being seen as human, whether or not they actually were. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility, and Grakka welcomed it with open arms and an open heart. She had defeated bandits and prejudice and fear. She had saved a village and found a home. And most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the greatest victories come not from the sword, but from the courage to be vulnerable, to love, to hope that the world might just be kind enough to love you back. In the end, that was the story she would tell, the legacy she would leave. Not of the warrior who killed the Bandit King, though that tale would always be told around fires and in taverns, but of the woman who dared to stay when everyone told her to go, who chose love over safety, who believed that acceptance was possible even when all evidence suggested otherwise. She had been right to believe, and the world was better for it.